Welcome to this guide on what classes are best for new players. So, for those of you that don't know, this video was recorded when the remaster second book, Player Core 2, just came out. I'm one of the first content creators to get their hands on it by pure random chance, so I will be spending a lot of time talking about what kinds of changes classes got in the form of the remaster. I spent a few hours before recording this, going over each class individually, but I feel like I'm still just going to be scratching the surface, but I think I know enough about them to be able to rank them based on how happy a new player would be to play them. And I'm just going to say it right now, I think that all the classes that people were scared of not being good enough going into the remaster are perfectly fine now, and maybe some of my favorites. So, with that out of the way, I want to say that if you are not subscribed to the channel, you should probably do that because a majority of my audience is not subscribed. And if that graph doesn't convince you, this graph will explain why I do it. Because you can see that massive spike, that was the last time I told somebody to subscribe. Yep, it made me gain basically as much as I'd normally get in a month in a day. That's absurd. So, with that, let's just get right into it. And by get right into it, I mean, let's explain what the tiers mean. So, in S tier, these are the classes that basically no matter what type of new player you are, you can play this class and have a great time with it. A tiers, there may be one or two snags that aren't really a big deal, and it's still a very good class to learn the game on. B tier is where you'll need to put in a good amount of elbow grease, but then it'll be an incredible experience after the fact. And for C and D tier, they don't exist anymore. All of the classes are very good to start the game with. I previously rated Alchemist and Oracle very poorly, but the remaster reworks have made them so they will fit into the top 3 tiers of this list. So, with that, I'm going to start with one of the classes that got the biggest reworks because I'm going to be going alphabetical order, starting with the classes that were reprinted in Player Core 2. So, Alchemist is first, and Alchemist is going to A tier. The only real snag that Alchemist has now is you need to learn what all the alchemical items do, but Alchemist now is a very functional class. The way they reworked it is they gave it fewer items per day in its daily batches of reagents. I'm putting the exact numbers on screen, and they have some feats that let you expand that a little bit, but you'll never get up to the absurd amounts of daily items that pre-remaster Alchemists were really getting. Instead, you have recharging encounter-based reagents that will let you make items on the fly, so you are constantly making items throughout the adventuring day. That is what Alchemist is all about now. They are about having this restockpiling form of items, so Alchemist is now very good early game, which was their big sticking point before, and they don't fall off late game. They now get master proficiency with their alchemical bombs, so bombers are actually pretty good. It isn't the meme of you are just a vending machine for the fighter, you are a capable character that generates these items that do things and are good. A lot of the mutagens were changed if they were slightly undertuned to now be more on par with the best mutagens. So like Bestial is a good example. It has been buffed so it no longer reduces your AC to go into that form and get those extra strikes. And all the Alchemist subclasses themselves are really strong now. I think the best example is again the Mutagenist, where they're going to do things like get temp HP whenever they're using these mutagens, and Alchemist is now a very strong class. And this may be surprising to a lot of people because Alchemist has been the class to have the most erratas of anything, but this time, I think they got it. I think Alchemist is now a strong and good class. I will note that if you are a new player wanting to build an Alchemist, learning what all the alchemical items do will be a minor issue, and a lot of guides, as the time I'm recording this, are going to be slightly out of date. So you're going to need to read through a good amount of items, but just filter for what's in Player Core 2 and you will be able to build a functional character. And if you want to play a character that does cool stuff with alchemical items, You can now do that, and it's efficient. It's good. You will enjoy it. So with that, we can now move on to Barbarian. So with Barbarian, I'd say the core theme of their changes here was they took things that were feats and then rolled them into the main class chassis, along with some other quality life fixes. So there are things like you can now rage as a free action when you roll initiative. You now have bonus move speed starting at level 3 that is increased when raging. You have just a bunch of stuff that used to be a feat that you now have in your core chassis, and they mostly did that so it can compete with Fighter. Another interesting thing they did is anathemas per instinct are now much more reduced or gone. So the best example of this is Superstition Instinct. Those of you that remember the pre-remaster Superstition Instinct will know it was basically unplayable unless you build your entire party around it, because letting an ally cast a spell on you would break your anathema, and that includes area of effect buff spells. So it was very, very easy to lose the ability to rage as a barbarian, as a Superstition Instinct. But now, you just become frightened 1 for basically until your rage is over, which is bad, but it's fine. And you still get a +2 to saving throw against all spells, so it is actually a very good mage hunting barbarian. And they also had Fury do slightly more damage, quality life buffs across the board. They get Intimidating Strike now, which is cool, but a lot of quality life buffs. Barbarian is now a class that I'm going to put at top of A tier. If you are a new player that is coming in here for a variety of gameplay style, Barbarian will probably not be a class for you, but if you want just a simple, straightforward character that will bonk things and do it effectively, Barbarian will be an awesome choice. It is now buffed, so Fighter is not just a better Barbarian or anything like that. Barbarian, very strong character, A+ from me. So Champion, I would say, got only very minor changes. They added in another type of champion where you can have enemies become dazzled easily, which, sure, dazzled is a strong status condition. I have stuff about that on my channel before. And they also made it so that way it's allies that get level 3 are slightly adjusted. They no longer get Animal Companion from there, but rather can pick up Animal Companions from feats. And their third one is actually very strong now. It is extra move speed. That also has some other benefits associated with it. It's bonus move speed, and if an ally provokes a reaction via moving, they get a +2 status bonus to all their defenses against that reaction. So trying to bait out reactive strikes as an ally of a champion becomes very easy because now you get a status bonus to AC for doing so. And they do have things like, whether you get Lay on Hands or Touch Corruption is now based on the divine font of your deity, and now there is a new focus spell for champions that use shields. They also got other quality of life buffs, particularly with their level 10 feat that lets them shield block and do their champion reaction at the same time, is now worded to work with the unholy reactions that provoke when enemy targets you. And it also now works with quick shield block, and you can then quick shield block to get that plus that champion reaction, and then do another champion reaction after it. So champion got, I'd say, significantly better if you're using a shield champion, and otherwise it's just quality of life better, and it's going to A tier because champion is just going to be efficient at what it does. I will say stick to the reactions that help you protect allies, because I think those are a bit stronger, just overall power level wise, and you really can't go wrong with champion. I'd still recommend taking Lay on Hands because it helps with your out of combat healing as well. So if you're a newer player and you want to play a more defensively minded character, a protector, champion is an awesome pick. Go ahead, do it. You will not be disappointed. So, Investigator. I have actually had my opinion sour on Investigator a little bit since the recording of the previous one of these videos. And that's because I realized, for me as an experienced GM, having an investigator at my table doesn't really bother me, but newer players are likely to come with newer GMs, and newer GMs are going to be less familiar with the type of case minigames that investigator will try to play, and will find feats like That's Odd, which is still here post-remaster, to be annoying. So, investigator is going to get a B tier from me, just because it's annoying to GM for, and it requires the player to be on top of a specialized minigame that, if you are a new player, that may distract you from the core of the system. And the investigator minigame is they try to have two different active cases going on that they then get some bonuses to try and find out questions about, and then they try to do their devise a stratagem, which is a free action if that creature may give them answers related to their case. That's the big thing now. That ability was reworked from if your case involves that creature and some vague wordings to now if you think that you can get answers from that creature, you get a free action devise a stratagem. So devise a stratagem lets you pre-roll your attack roll, and then you decide if you want to take it or if you want to use that to get a bonus for a skill action. Investigator now has a thing to do if you roll low on your devise a stratagem die. So Investigator is less likely to hurt itself off its own minigame now, so it crawls out of C tier, which is where I would have put it otherwise. If you don't want to manage that minigame, you can play a rogue with a good amount of intelligence and get a very similar feeling character that doesn't involve the devise a stratagem minigame. So with Monk, they barely had any changes. I'm gonna be honest, their changes were like minimal, some wordings to a feat here or there. The ancestral weaponry and the monk feat for monastic weaponry are now rolled into one feat, which, cool, but that's about the only real major change I saw for the entire monk class chassis. I could be mistaken there, but that's about it in terms of the changes I saw, so I don't have much more to say about monk in terms of new stuff, but for new people coming to the game, monks are a very defensive-oriented character. They are very hard to stop because they have very good saves, very good AC. And they tend to do unarmed brawling where you pick your martial arts stance and you beat up people by using that stance. So with Monk, I'm going to go ahead and put them in A tier right behind Champion, because they're another pretty simple character. You run in, you beat them up, you have a good time. Ending me coming in here to just quickly say monks tend to rely on flurry of blows, one action to make 2 strikes, can only do it once per turn due to the flourish trait, and that leads them to have issues filling the other 2 actions in a turn. So you're going to need to learn how to move to get advantages, skill actions you can be doing, etc., so that you can fill those 2 actions with stuff that still gives you value. That will make Monk a little bit harder than one may expect for a newer player, but you're plenty efficient just punching a lot. So, there you go. Oracle. So, Oracle was the other class that got a very major rework in Player Core 2. And people will go, I don't know what they are really planning for Oracle, and let me tell you, they cooked with this one. So, basically, now instead of having a curse where you go between different stages, you have a curse bound score that ticks up and goes down when you refocus, and ticks up when you use specialized feats that are your curse bound activities that are way stronger than normal activities, but then inflict a downside on you based on what type of Oracle you are. So for example, if you are a Curse of Life Oracle, you will start the game off with this level 1 Oracle feat that lets you heal your allies very efficiently for a single action, but for each stack of this curse that you have, you are going to be harder to heal with magic. And you now have this really interesting feeling character where for this one burst, you can outpour more magic than you should reasonably be able to handle, but then that comes and bites you in the butt until you can sit down, catch your breath, and refocus. That is cool. So Oracle now has a bunch of these really awesome curse-bound feats, and I would show more of them, but I'm going to let other people have a chance in the spotlight for that one. And I'm going to tell you, after reading through a few of these Oracle feats, a lot of them made me go, wow, that is cool and metal, because you're like using your own form, using your body, taking these negative status penalties on yourself to do these big, awesome magical effects that are not tied to spell slots. And that not tied to spell slots thing means that making mistakes in spell preparation really doesn't matter. If you take heal and make it a signature spell, you're gonna be fine. Oracles now have an extended spell list, so they're not just restricted to pure divine anymore. And Oracles are now just really strong characters, and it's gonna be my first S tier of the list. If you are a newer player, you don't really need to know that much about spells to play an Oracle and have a good time. You will need to track your Oracle curse and what level of curse you're at, but I think that's manageable for a new player that wants to do this kind of fantasy, and I think this is a class that can really draw in a new player and make them excited to play the game. So, surprisingly enough, Oracle is jumping from like the F tier on my last tier list to an S tier now. Because it's just so exciting and fresh and different from everything else I've seen in like D20 RPGs up to this point. And major kudos to the design team for that one, because I would not have come up with a solution that clean and that good. Yeah. Sorcerer, it's pretty unchanged. It now has a lot more stuff to do with, you have magical blood and magical bloodline, but I really don't think it changed that much from the previous review, and that had it be mostly, you are a charisma caster that can pick any spell list and has extra spell slots. That is the main draw of Sorcerer still. You have cooler feats now, and some cooler bells and whistles, but the core of Sorcerer is, you're a strong caster with some extra slots. And being a strong caster with some extra slots makes it a pretty good character. If you want to play just like a general caster, and not worry about, oh no, how many heals do I need to prep? Sorcerer's a great pick. It's going in A tier right next to Alchemist, because they have similar issues with needing to read up on a bunch of alchemical items and needing to read up on a bunch of spells. So, similar issues if you're coming in as a new player, so I'm going to put them at similar rankings. It's just a matter of what thematics appeals to you as a player. Swashbuckler is a class that previously I have felt pretty poorly about. I have not liked Swashbuckler in the past because I felt they were too inconsistent. But they fixed that consistency issue, because now they have the bravado trait, and you don't need to succeed in order to gain panache, you just need to not critically fail. And that means Swashbucklers are now going to be very consistently able to generate panache, at least for a little bit, because they also get feats that generate panache for a shorter duration. So they can get that panache, do their finishers, and keep on cycling through their cool kit and all their cool moves, and actually feel like what their class fantasy proposed in the first place. You don't need to roll super high on dice on skill checks in order to make Swashbuckler good now. They also just straight up get like +1 to skill checks, even if they don't have panache, and some other feats were reduced in level, like agile maneuvers now is double agile and a lower level to access, so gymnast Swashbuckler wrestlers are now incredibly potent. And Swashbuckler feats are naturally very flavorful, very fun things. And if you want to play a character that is moving around the battlefield gracefully, styling on their enemies, and just kind of quipping everywhere, and feeling like an action hero doing it, Swashbuckler now actually lives up to that class fantasy, and does so in a unique way. And because all of Swashbuckler's interesting tactics are self-contained, something that I really didn't like about it beforehand, because it means you can't really blend it into other things easily, that's actually a good thing for a new player, because it means everything that they'll reasonably want to do is written down on their sheet, which makes it easier to play than you would expect for a newer player. So therefore, Swashbuckler is going into S tier. And I did not expect to be saying that here, because if you remember before, I rated Swashbuckler very low on my previous one of these tier lists. But I think that Swashbuckler now, with you being able to get panache on fail, and having a bunch of interesting tactics, if you are a newer player that wants to engage with the interesting flow and style of the game, and are worried about, ooh, I don't want to be doing the same thing every round, I think Swashbuckler can get you there pretty convincingly now. And I think that it is tactically deep, yet approachable because you always have the options to fall back on, like, okay, I get panache and I try to set up for a finisher, and you always know that's your goal, and then the rest of the kit kind of naturally flows from there. So I think Swashbuckler gets to hang out in S tier, and I'm kind of surprised by that. But when I think about it, it just makes sense to put it up there, because it would feel super fun and make me want to play more Pathfinder to have a Swashbuckler at the table. So we are now out of the Player Core 2 classes, which means I'm going to be spending less time explaining classes now, and more just focusing on what is their central thematic gimmick, and what kind of issues new players would have playing them. So something like the Bard, you are a classical charisma caster, spontaneous is likely easier to play than prepared, and you have a lot of party-wide or enemy-wide area effect buffs and debuffs that last for a short duration, but can be spammed pretty easily. Bards, I think, are an easy caster, great support. I'd say they can be anywhere near the top of A tier. I'm just going to drop them there because Bards are fun if you want to play a caster that's part martial because they have some weapon proficiencies, and you like the idea of being a support that throws out buffs and does different skill actions to manipulate the battlefield. Bard can do that. Cleric is going to S tier for you cannot really build a cleric wrong. If you are a war priest and you have some armor, you are going to be an efficient character. You just have a good amount of strength, good amount of wisdom, get into some medium armor. And basically from there, no matter what you do, you will be an effective character. You can spend all your slots on something that just repairs items when you don't have any items breaking in the campaign, but because you have so many extra spell slots of heal, you are still going to be a useful caster, and you are going to have some kind of weapon probably, so you're gonna be useful in a normal fight. So clerics are never useless, particularly at the low levels, and I really enjoy the Divine List. Actually, Player Core 2 reprinted some bangers like the second rank damage spell, Sudden Blight, so you can have some really powerful spells on these divine casters, on these clerics, that just make the class seem really, really strong, because it is. Cleric is a caster that is at such a disgusting power level that you don't need to read your spell list other than heal to have an effective character. If you're a newer player, know that you can be a cleric and you will be a good character. Druids are power level wise a bit below cleric in my opinion, but based on what subclass you pick, you're going to have a different character. You're always primarily going to be a caster, but the primal list is commonly said to be the strongest list because you have the best healing and the best damage spells, and that makes it one of the strongest spell lists in the game. There you go. So druids have access to that list, and they have powerful abilities based on their subclass. So if you just want to play a caster that is associated with nature, Druid does exactly what you want it to. It will fill that fantasy, you can read a guide up on spells, and it won't be that difficult because I don't think there are that many truly difficult classes in this game. I'm probably going to put it just behind Champion, because I think Champion has big satisfying moments with stuff like Retributive Strike that Druid more so has to get from its spells, and that requires a bit more planning and work to get like the most out of Druid's kit. So I'm going to just kind of place Druid right there. Fighter, it's going nice tier. And for those of you that know the Pathfinder 2e scene, that's not going to surprise you too much. Fighter is a class that is known for, you have +2 to hit, you have reactive strike, no matter what you do from that spot, you are going to be a strong character. The rest of Fighter's feats are just cool on-hit effects that you then weave together to build up your own custom fighting style, and by picking what feats you're using at any time, they become a tactically rich character. So Fighter is very good, and if you are a newer player, you just pick what the feats you want to use, and that's an effective way to build a fighter. So fighters are a very good pick if you want to play a character with a weapon, but you don't necessarily want to have too many other frills. Fighter will get you there. It is your generic weapon-using character that can be flavored to wherever you want it. And so, next we have Gunslinger. Gunslinger, I am actually going to put in top of B tier instead of A tier, and that's for a simple reason. Guns tend to have the fatal trait, and if you're playing Gunslinger, you're probably going to want to use a gun, because why else would you play the class titled Gunslinger? You can use an Arbalist or something else that'll make you less reliant on team support. But if you want to make the most out of a fatal weapon or a deadly weapon or some other weapon with a strong critical hit effect, you are going to want to have team support, teams buffing you, somebody grappling that bad guy so they're off guard. You're going to want to have that team play in order to get the most out of your fatal weaponry. And if you don't care about doing the most damage on the team, that's fine. A Gunslinger has good support options to then provide the debuffs for itself and others, particularly stuff like Pistolero, being able to make enemies off guard from range, and all that kind of stuff. But I know that a lot of new players have picked Gunslinger and then felt disappointed because they thought they were picking a pure damage character, when Gunslinger is still 1 part support, 2 parts damage, more or less. And ranged weapons in general are tuned to be a bit weaker than people would expect coming into the system as brand new players. But with team support, Gunslinger is still a very efficient, very powerful class. It's just that when you are thinking about a group of newer players, a lot of them tend to build what I call selfish characters because they don't really want to invest time into getting a buff state and just want to do damage now. Gunslinger works a bit worse in that type of environment, so that's why it's down in B tier and not up in A tier. I still think it is a plenty powerful class. It does good stuff. It's just not quite up to that level because it relies on some team play to be maximally efficient. Next, we have the Inventor. And Inventor's gimmick is that you can overload your weapons, that way it does extra damage, and sometimes it explodes. So you have area damage on a martial type character. So Inventor is like a bit of damage, bit of area damage, bit of elemental damage types, little bit of healing, and you just kind of cobble together a bunch of different stuff into one character, which is very fun. And I think if you're coming into the class titled Inventor, you're not looking for a pure damage character. If you want to do something with pure damage output, look at fighters, look at barbarians, look at those types of characters. If you're coming here because you want to play a cool utility marshal that is going to have a weird augmented thing with them, Inventor will do that. So I'm going to go ahead and put it next to Champion. Inventor is a bit more casterly than Champion because you have more abilities that would feel like spells, particularly with your unstable actions, but I think Inventor very much is a satisfying character to play, and it's pretty hard to build Inventor wrongly. I would say you will want to maximize either strength or dexterity, whichever stat you are using to attack, alongside your key score of intelligence, because you are still going to be wanting to attack, no matter what type of Inventor you're trying to build. So Kineticist is one I'm going to put at the very top of A tier. And the reason I'm putting it very top of A tier, even though I think that some people in the comments will say, isn't that class really difficult to get into? Is I really don't think it is. You look at the Kineticist as you are playing a bender from Avatar: The Last Airbender, and you are picking out what element or elements you want to use. And you just kind of look at, what kind of character do I want to play? Pick 2 elements that sound cool, and you have a then curated list of things that are all at least good, and it's an exciting character that you then get to play. The thing that keeps it out of S tier is there are a lot of words on Elemental Blast. There are a lot of words in all of its traits that you will need to learn. And because it is a more wordy class, it isn't quite as accessible as the things I'm putting up into S tier, but it is really close. So it's at top of A tier. If you want to play a caster, but are overwhelmed by the idea of, what if I needed that spell later? Play a Kineticist. They do not run out of their spell-like abilities. So Kineticist can solve that issue for you and still provide the area damage, provide some of that healing, provide some of that damage mitigation. A lot of the casterly stuff that you kind of want to do can be done by a Kineticist. They just have a pretty hard time with the buff and debuff part of the game. So, Magus. Magus is this game's classic spellsword character. The way I describe it is, imagine if Eldritch Knight Fighter from D&D 5e, instead of having only low-level spell slots, had only high-level spell slots, and your sword would explode with them. That is a sick character concept, and I don't think Magus is particularly that hard to build, because you're kind of picking attack spells and slotting in a couple utility cantrips, and oh look, an efficiently built Magus. So, I think that it is a common character concept or theme, where you then have a character that's pretty easy for them to be built, because you either max out strength, max out dexterity, and just attack with whatever weapon uses those stats. And there are natural fighting styles you'll fall into. So I think Magus is going to go up in A tier because it's a really cool class. Just pick some attack roll spells to spell strike with, and you'll have a good time. You can look at other guides, but honestly with Magus, if you just know that, hey, I'm looking to take stuff that will make weapons attack stronger, like Runic Weapon early game, and then eventually you're just going to want to grab a couple attack rolls for your spell strikes and maybe some other utility or area damage stuff depending on what your party needs, it's always going to be a good time. Psychic is this game's like wave blaster caster, where you can get increased damage on one turn, but then you're like stupefied later in the fight, and it's a lot to manage. It's a lot of words. So it's going to B tier because it's too complicated for me to explain quickly. It has signature mechanic of amps, where it has specialized cantrips that then can be used as focus spells to get more power. It then can unleash its psyche to do more damage with spells that don't have durations, and it all has cool stuff going on. But it's complicated, and as a newer player, that complexity may scare you away. But if the concept of this complex character that is able to output a lot of damage at once, and then has to wait in the back and like refuel their mind sounds cool, Psychic will get there. I think Oracle does the curse-bound character concept in a way that I think is simpler to digest. So Oracle gets to be in S tier while Psychic is in B tier. And that is not a sentence I expected to say before I read Player Core 2. But Oracle legitimately fills that character niche as well, and I think it's easier to pilot as a newer player. So, Ranger. Ranger is all about its edge and hunting prey, which you can do at will, by the way, even out of combat. And then it gets benefits against its hunted prey, whether that's extra damage on your first strike that you share with your animal companion, lower multi-attack penalty that you also share with the animal companion, or bonuses to AC and some skill checks, which you would also share with the animal companion. So, Ranger is a good class that does what you'd expect it to do, and you can have a lot of fun playing a Ranger. If the idea of playing a woodsman who always hunts down their chosen enemy down to its last breath, and Ranger's going to be a great fit for you. Because that's kind of what Ranger is about, and you can do it as a bow, you can do it as melee, you can do it as really whatever you want. Then we have the Rogue. And rogues can be built in a lot of different ways in the system. There's a way to get a rogue for every single key ability score. And that's cool. So usually you will want to be either Dex or Strength. Oh, I said every ability score minus Constitution. Currently, only Kineticist can have key score Constitution, but Rogues can have the other 5 stats. Sure, that's fine. Generally, it's still best to have Dexterity or Strength if you're a Ruffian as your key ability score, because the main thing you want to do is hit characters that are off guard so you can get Sneak Attack. And the only thing that is keeping Rogue out of S tier is Sneak Attack sometimes needs teamwork to have it go off, particularly if you are range attacking Rogue. Because then you're looking at using stuff like the Mastermind, the Recall Knowledges, and all that kind of stuff. And Recall Knowledge tends to be worse in groups full of newer players that don't really adjust their tactics based on the information. So Rogue is going to hang on that A tier. And for the people typing up a storm in the comments saying, but Rogue gets a bunch of extra skills that'll help with their versatility, that should bump them up a bit, I'm going to say, I've also seen players get lost in the amount of options they have as a rogue, and forget that they can do things with the auxiliary skills that are only trained and are a bit lower on their sheet. So, I've seen players get overwhelmed by that, but if you're the type of player that loves to have a bunch of options and a bunch of different ways to approach things and always have the right tool for the job, Rogue can do that very well, but I have also seen players get overwhelmed by it. You will want to think when you're building a rogue, how am I getting off guard? How can I work with my party to get off guard more consistently? Etc, etc, etc. And then with Summoner, Summoner is a complicated class. The best way I can describe it is if you have seen JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, you are a stand user. You have some magic, and your stand is a partial martial, and you staple the two characters together to make one full character. So you're a caster, stapled to a warrior character, you both share a hit point pool. If one of you takes damage, so does the other, and has a bunch of rules for how those interact. It then lets you basically get 4 actions with tandem stuff. And if you can wrap your head around being in 2 places at once, the class becomes pretty simple. But until then, it is going to be difficult. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in B tier along with Psychic, because they kind of have similar issues of it's a good amount of reading in order to really figure out how to use them efficiently. And it will require a deeper understanding of the game, because Summoner will require you to learn how martial characters like to do things with multi-attack penalty, while also having to learn how to play a caster with spell slots. Where Magus kind of shortcuts that by, you're really playing a martial that has spell strike. Summoner, you really need to, I feel, you need to learn both the caster and the warrior halves of the game separately. So that can be a big issue for you. And Thaumaturge? Thaumaturge has complexity issues, where it has a lot of different potential actives it could have. You need to learn what all of its abilities do, how it can target people and learn weaknesses and then deal extra damage to them, and all that kind of stuff. But if you're willing to put in the time and read it, it's a really cool occultist type knowledge-based hunter class that uses charisma. So it's really cool for a specific type of character concept. It's just that it has a high complexity, so it's at the bottom of A tier. Which, it has a familiar that has a bunch of cool special abilities, can be any spell list. It is a prepared caster and does lean on spells for a lot of its power budget. But it can do really interesting, powerful things if you use the familiar and you're trying to buff allies. So it kind of plays a party support role like Bard, but has all lists and depending on what patron you're picking, and has a cool flavor. I think Witch is a powerful class. It's not too difficult to understand. You're going to want to look up a guide for spells, but I think I can say that about Sorcerer as well. I'm going to put it slightly below Sorcerer because I think it's slightly harder, but I also think that Witch has more uniqueness to it, and it's probably a more common character fantasy that people have. Now, last on the list, we have Wizard. This is probably the most castery caster of them all. As a wizard, you are going to have more spell slots, you're going to be able to recover some spent slots, and you're going to just overall be leaning on spells to be your main power budget. So the power level of your wizard will be determined by how good of a caster player you are. And if you think your wizard is weak, you will want to look at what spells you're preparing and change those out. And as a newer player, I know a lot of people would tend to get frustrated rather than want to put in like another hour into reading guides to pick out like the best spells. And Wizard puts a lot of its power budget into having the right spell, where a lot of other casters like Oracle, Bard, etc. will have something outside of their spells that still gives them a lot of power. That being said, I think that's not as hard to do as a lot of people make it out to be online. I don't think Wizard is as difficult as people say it is, but that is a legitimate cost. Wizard is a class that does want you to get good at playing casters because it's a caster, and it is one of those no-frill casters, and I think Wizard is more skill-testy than Sorcerer because prepared casters are generally harder to play, but I also think Wizard has a lot of reward to it because all of its extra slots mean that you can always have the right spell for the job if you planned ahead of time properly. But that is work, so it is going to be in B tier along with Psychic and Summoner. So this is basically my list, and I hope this guide was helpful for you. And as far as Player Core 2 stuff, I'm going to basically post until I drop. So you can expect what I'm hoping to be daily uploads for a week, and then you'll probably hear nothing from me for the week after that.